Hi, everybody. Welcome to Retire with Style. I'm Alex. I'm here with Wade Pfau and a very special guest, Mr. Rob Cordeau. Hey, Rob.
Hey, Alex. Good to be here again.
Likewise.
Yeah, hi, Rob.
Hey,
And,
Wade.
and for those who haven't listened to every episode, Rob Cordeau is one of our great advisors at McLean Asset Management, who we've had on a number of episodes, who does a great job really diving into detail and giving examples of day-to-day financial planning. And we're excited to have you here today, Rob, to talk about Roth conversions, which
Yeah.
actually recently some of the episodes maybe not the most interesting topics in the world, but I think now with Roth conversions, it is an interesting topic.
Yes. You didn't have me at tax bunching. You did not have me at whatever other.
Periodic payments. Was
Yeah,
that
you didn't have me at the periodic
Tax
payment.
torpedo? That's not
But
exciting.
Roth conversions, I'm catching what you're throwing, Wade.
Yeah,
Is that what you mean?
this is on fire.
Yeah. All of a sudden, now you have my attention.
Right. This is the real deal.
All right, Rob. Are you ready, Rob?
Ooh, this is exciting stuff. I'm ready.
All right.
All right. Yeah, I guess, Rob, the place we should start is to really just define, when we say Roth conversions, like what we're even talking about. If you can give us a little bit of background there.
Sure. So, we've got our basic IRAs, 401ks, pre-tax dollars. We all know that we put the money in. We haven't paid tax on it. So Uncle Sam is going to ask for a tax eventually in the future with RMDs. Roth IRAs, just the opposite. We fund it with after-tax dollars, and it grows tax exempt. So we never have to pay tax on those. The growth, there's no RMDs from a Roth, at least while we're alive. So the concept behind a Roth conversion is, does it make sense to convert dollars over from a traditional pre-tax IRA over to a Roth, prepay that tax at the time of conversion in the hopes of saving tax later on in life or for the next generation? So it's a neat analysis. It's a complicated analysis, but it can add up to some real significant savings. And it's one that we do a lot with clients. I would say at least 50 to 70% of our clients are asking about it, whether or not it makes sense for them. So a lot of people are focused on this as a potential saving strategy.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you ask an accountant about Roth conversions, you might get a different answer than if you ask a financial planner who's looking at the long-term lifetime picture. But accountants, over time, I hear, is voluntarily paying taxes. So what's the kind of the situation there? What may be the initial knee-jerk reaction an accountant says with the Roth conversion conversation?
Yeah, I think their reaction is pretty similar to mine because we do a lot of tax planning for clients. And our goal is, how do we save tax dollars this year? We do tax projections in the fall, and we're trying to save money and pay less to Uncle Sam. So the idea of voluntarily getting out your checkbook and stroking a check to Uncle Sam when he's not asking for that money for decades more into the future is sort of completely the opposite from our way of thinking. And I'm sure accountants are in that same camp. And as much as I love Roth IRAs, what's not to love, right? They're tax exempt forever. I still am reluctant to recommend a Roth conversion unless it makes mathematical sense. There has to be a compelling mathematical reason for me to recommend it. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Wade. It's about looking long term, right? It's not just this. It's very myopic to look at just this 1 year and say, well, I could save tax dollars this year by not converting. Let's look big picture and see whether this makes sense.
And kind of the mathematical problem there is just we have to pay taxes at some point. So let's look for the opportunities to pay at the lowest possible rates. And then now this is not just for yourself or your household, but your beneficiaries as well. If you're at the point where you think you may be leaving a legacy, looking at what taxes are they going to have to pay versus what taxes would you pay as part of the calculation.
Yeah, for sure.
So someone thinking about Roth conversions, at what point in their life is this likely to be like a more realistic consideration versus less likely to provide a positive impact?
Sure. I will say, I'll break that down into two pieces. I'll tell you when we see most people looking at it, and it's often in their peak earning years, sort of pre-retirement. And then if they're retired, especially if, say, they retire in their late 50s, early 60s, and there's sort of a gap before maybe Social Security income starts or RMDs start. So they're in a spot where maybe their income, their taxable income is lower. That's often a prime time to be looking at this. That being said, there are still some other opportunities if somebody has income that's very lumpy and they're in their 30s or 40s and they have a very low income year. That would still be a great year to take advantage of a Roth conversion. So it's not really limited to a certain age group. It's more about your current tax bracket is a greater consideration.
Okay. Yeah, and so the idea there is just when you have an opportunity to pay taxes at a lower rate, and as you're suggesting, if you're an early retiree, you might have a window where there's, especially pre-Social Security, and this could even be an incentive to delay Social Security in addition to all the other legacy protection aspects of that decision, to do some Roth conversions at a time when you can pay those taxes at a lower rate.
Yeah, and I would say that's the most common use case is we're bridging that gap between retirement and the start of Social Security. And it's kind of neat. I mean, we had one client that the wife was about 8 years older than the husband. And we started with hers first. I prefer to start with Roth conversions in the older spouse's account because they're going to be subject to RMDs sooner. And even when they're older, if there's still money in both of them, the older person's IRA is going to be subject to the higher percentage RMD calculation, right? So, but we did serial Roth conversions for her for about 6 or 7 years. Back then, it used to be 70 and a half was the RMD age. The year prior to her turning 70 and a half, we emptied her IRA. So all of her money had been converted to Roth. At that point, her husband was 8 years younger. We flipped over and started doing conversions for him, which we could do for 8 more years before he was subject to RMDs. And by the time we get done, his taxable IRA was a lot smaller, his pre-tax dollars. And both of their Roth IRAs were very healthy after doing those serial conversions. It gave them a lot more tax flexibility once they got to RMD age.
And you were saying, I'm sorry, Wade, you had a string. Go on. You were on a rhythm.
No, go for it, Alex.
You were talking about you still don't recommend it. Obviously, this was, a home run in terms of it worked out. Now, before you decided to activate it or to initiate the process, because this is a multi-year thing. You went a decade into doing Roth conversions, decade plus for this couple. What was the analysis? Because at the high level, obviously we're not going to break it down, but you were saying, no matter what, this is one of these things that do the numbers work out, as opposed to just like a crackerjack rule of thumb, best practice. How do you weigh that potential tax hit to decide, okay, let's do this or not on an Excel? What's that break even? What are the dynamics that go into deciding on this break even before you decided on this 10 plus year quest?
Yeah, it's kind of a two-pronged approach. One of them is mathematical and analytical, and the other is us making some pretty difficult assumptions about the future. If I could kind of break it down.
And then the only sensitivity that I have as you break it down is the listener, they're consumers, we tend to attract folks that these topics are of great interest. And so, how would they be thinking about these trade-offs?
Right. And I mean, we're doing this using software. So we're analyzing their tax bracket in the current year. So we have a pretty certain view of what their top marginal bracket is for this year because we're performing a tax projection before the year's over. So that's the first phase. And if you think about a good, you mentioned like a rule of thumb, if I'm certain that my future tax rate is going to be higher in retirement than the tax rate in the year of conversion, then that's a decent indicator that this might be a good year for Roth conversion, right? Because now I can pay tax at a lower rate, and then in the future when it's coming out, where I would be exposed to a higher rate, it'll be coming from a Roth account. I won't have to pay that higher rate. So the first phase is figure out what is the current tax bracket. Then we're going to plug that, all of our data, into a more long-term retirement projection software. We're looking out 20 or 30 or 40 years and get a sense for what future tax rates might be for that individual. And this is where we start getting into the second part that's challenging, right? Because so much is unknown. There are tax policy questions, right? Will there be legislative changes that push tax rates up higher in the future? And then there are personal unknowns for each client. Will one of the spouses pass away, and will we be left with a widow or widower who's on a higher tax bracket schedule because they can't do married filing jointly? There's a lot of question marks about what rate someone will be in. So we have to make some pretty broad assumptions to try to figure it out from there. And it's a very murky science. This isn't a really precise, and it's because we're trying to predict 20 or 30 years in the future.
Yeah, but the high level though, listen, you can make a plan. Listen, we're going to do this for the next 12 years, whatever. All right, look at this wonderful spreadsheet. 2 decimal points out, it's great. Right? Not even Wade can touch this one. Right? Yeah. Is it in MATLAB? No, that's more of a Wade thing. But you have that. But there's nothing to say 3 years in, situation changes, you halt it, it's fine. With the years that it was relevant, you still did it. And so is there no harm, no foul? Nothing crazy was done, even though you went out 12 years. So I like the ability, from what I'm hearing, is that you'll look at it every year anyways, just to make sure. It's not like year 8, you never looked at this break even again in years 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Right. Is that correct?
It is. And we're looking at it every year for every client. And that's why we prefer doing those tax projections every year. So it's the fall, we get a sense for where we are. And if there's some unknown event, some unusual situation, we'll take advantage of it. We've done it with, I'll give you some unusual situations. A client with a terminal disease or a really, really large medical year where they have 6-figure medical expenses, we'll do a Roth conversion for that person that we don't expect to live through the end of the year. So that we're taking advantage of that year where they're going to have much less taxable income because of this large deduction that they have.
The other piece I want to say to this, because there's an existential quality to your example. It's not that you're like, let's it's all about dollars and cents. But I bet you there was some gratification in executing that strategy for that person that had a terminal illness, because you know what? They were able to bring some benefit to the family in a way that they wouldn't have otherwise. As they, you know what I'm trying to say here? Like it's not like it's how can we make sure though that we maximize every single dollar? I bet you there was some emotional happiness to be able to execute something for that person. You follow what I'm getting at?
Absolutely. And I didn't present it to them like I did to you. No. Emotionless financial robot, but yes. Thank you for clarifying.
No, but that's the truth. We had a client, Wade, once that it was to her benefit to pass away. She was going to pass away, right? And it was getting near the end of the year, and let's say there were 3 weeks left to the year, and she and it was, from a financial planning standpoint, it made sense. It was a little better if she passed away in the new year or not, that kind of thing, in the new year relative to the current year, for whatever. I think it was a tax thing. And that became this person's, like, it was a goal for this. It was weird how they fought for it, and that's why I was thinking, there were echoes of that in your story in terms of, sometimes, it provides some sort of semblance of purpose.
And it might help too, just with that large medical expense scenario, that you're going to end up wasting that potential deduction if you don't have income to offset it. So that the Roth conversion can even be a way that at least you can take advantage of this big itemized deduction. Otherwise, it's wasted.
Yeah, and we see it a lot. Again, we talked about those bridge years between, say, 60 and 70. We have a lot of clients who maybe work part-time or they do consulting, and that income is not consistent. So we might have a scenario where a client says to me in the fall, it's been a rough year. I've only made $20,000 with my consulting gig. I got another $80,000 in receivables, so that's coming in, but I don't know when. And I'll say, you know what? Why don't you push that off till January? Tell them not to pay you till January. We can do a bigger Roth conversion this year, and then you can pull in that income next year. So for some clients, they've got a little bit of discretion when it comes to income in a sense like that, and we can use that to our advantage.
Rob, you had mentioned, because I think this speaks to a lot of things with regards to the dynamics of an advisor, that, okay, your CPA may be, many CPAs make great decisions, but there could be a case where there's conflicting advice between you and a CPA with regards to this strategy, because, the CPA is paid to some extent, reduce taxes, and, they want to show that quote unquote value every year as opposed to something that's more temporarily in the future. So they just discount it. I'm not saying that happens. I don't want to badmouth anyone here. I'm just kind of saying there could be a situation where there's kind of dissonance between you and a CPA with regards to a client's situation. If you recommend this strategy, let's just say this person that you did a decade plus conversion strategy on, how do you get buy-in, or how do you suggest that the client speak to the CPA about this strategy as well? That whole rigmarole. Because the reason is a listener listens to this, tells their advisor, tells their CPA, and the CPA or the advisor just wands it, saying, brushes it off, saying, no, don't worry about it.
Right.
What do you do?
Good question. Yeah, I would say most of the time we're in concert, right? Most of the time, I think, especially tax professionals understand the tax advantages of a Roth. So I think they get it. I think most tax preparers are more focused on looking in the rearview mirror at what happened last year. They're just compressed in the early part of the year, just getting everyone's tax returns out the door. So most of those tax preparers are not really engaged in forward-looking tax planning as so much as they are focused on tax preparation, right? What just happened. But I think they get it. Most of the time we are in agreement. Occasionally I've come across where we weren't. My preference is to get on the phone with that professional personally and just try to work it out and help them to see why this is an appropriate strategy, and so that we can both get on the same page. And because I try to make it a point not to go outside of my lane and give tax advice in an area where I shouldn't. But we're also very strong on taxes. So oftentimes we'll make a recommendation and the accountant's fully on board. They get it. They appreciate that we are looking forward and doing tax planning. So usually we all get on the same page. We haven't had really any situations where we had a differential and the client had to kind of pick a side.
Yeah, in some cases, it may just be a matter of really both parties. The goal is to provide the most after-tax wealth to their client. But if you haven't really thought through things, you're just doing the tax forms. It's okay. Let's minimize taxes this year as the way to provide the most after-tax wealth. And then when it's pointed out, well, we have to strategize here over the lifetime when to pay these taxes to create the most after-tax wealth. And in some cases, voluntarily paying taxes today, because that can reduce the tax burden in the future in a positive manner, to lay that foundation for the most after-tax wealth. The accountant would say, okay, I get it now. So that you probably had those kinds of conversations over the years and work with folks that are on board with that sort of philosophy, I would
True.
think.
Yeah. I would say more often the conflict comes between us and the client. The client has a preconceived idea of what the most appropriate thing to do is, and it's more convincing the client of the strategy. And ironically, it's funny, with so much ink being spilled on this topic of Roth conversions in among journalists, its clients are very excited about it. And the more common response that I get is, we'll do a tax projection and I'll present it to the client and say, well, you can convert $32,000 to Roth this year and bring you right up to the top of the 22% bracket. We think that's a recommendation for you. And the response I get, I just got one like this a couple months ago.
Wait, was it Wade? Was it Wade?
No. And the
Tell
client
the
said,
truth. Because you talked about consulting gig, and so my mind went right to Wade.
nope, it's not Wade. So the client said 32,000. I mean, I get what you're doing.
No, it's not Wade.
Good.
Never mind. 32,000.
No.
You're off by like 5 zeros, right, Wade?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
okay.
Exactly. And the client said 32,000. I mean, I like the idea, Rob, but like, why don't we go big? I mean, I have a 7-figure IRA here. If you're doing 32,000 a year on conversions, well, we're never going to get this whole thing converted. It's going to grow faster than that.
I'm sorry, it's Wade.
He's back to Wade again. And so that's the common, response that I get is, well,
so they're all in.
Yeah, if a little bit is a good thing, then a lot.
Yeah.
He wanted to do hundreds of thousands. He wanted to do like 300,000 to 500,000 a year of Roth conversions. And I had to explain to him, that's sort of like going out with your family for an ice cream, and you get an ice cream cone, and you're like, wow, that's delicious. I should get a half gallon and just dig into it tonight and have the whole thing, right? There is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And so explaining how a $300,000 Roth conversion was going to push him through a couple more tax brackets, and how that's going to be a higher bracket than I anticipate he will ever pay in the future. It just doesn't make mathematical sense. So again, setting aside our guesswork on tax policy and future legislation, it just doesn't make mathematical sense. So that's going to be our first layer, is do the math, see if it makes sense maybe to fill up brackets. And then let's put a separate layer on top of that, as let's talk about what you think future tax law might look like. Let's just have a conversation about that.
I have to stop you there. This is a reoccurring theme that Wade and I have. And we ask each other, every few episodes, we kind of bring it up. Tax policy. When you're, when Wade's doing his book and his updates coming up next year, everyone. So FYI, February. January. Sorry, Wade.
I got to wait till like January 8th to get the CPI number for the current year.
All right. But it's coming up. But, when he does these updates, he has to do these projections that he's running in the scenarios, and he just goes with what the law is. And if the law says it's going to change in 3 years back to some sunset thing, whatever it is, that kind of.
Well, and to be less abstract, it's just that in 2026, the current law says we go back to the old tax rates from 2017.
Right.
Yeah, but you kind of implement those. And so when we're doing projections for clients, or when you're doing your projection to give somebody, if you will, a sensible answer, what do you do? It could be a mixture of scenario analysis where, bad scenario, good scenario, middle of the road. It could be just tax policy this, tax policy that, split the baby. What do you guys, not what do you, what is your preference for presenting this when you're doing your analysis?
My starting point is the same as Wade's. Let's look at what the current law is for taxes, right? And even including the sunset of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, what will it be? So assume that it will sunset.
By the way, include me in that positive halo and say the same as Wade and Alex's. That way I get some of that.
Yeah, exactly.
I get that credibility. I get that street credibility.
To the brilliant mind here between the two of you.
Wade and Alex. We have a lot
That's
in
right.
common. No.
So that's the starting point, right? To see if it just makes logical sense before we start going down the, the rabbit hole of what do we think will happen with tax rates. Then I do go down that rabbit hole with a client. And some clients are very vocal about this. I'll never forget a client I had. This was about 15 years ago. And he wanted to go all in on the Roth conversions. He wanted to do very, very large. He wanted to convert all of his.
So this
IRAs.
is even different than the previous example.
Yeah, different client.
So you get this kind of reaction then, like
Yeah. And so he said, I want to go all in on this Roth conversion. And I said, why do you want to do that? And he said, well, Rob, just look at the national debt. And at the time, the national debt was $10 trillion, 10 trillion. I remember the conversation and the number. He's like, Rob, this thing is ballooning. I mean, it can't go a whole lot higher than $10 trillion. And how is the government going to balance their budget? I mean, there's only two ways to do it. They cut spending and they can raise taxes. And there's no way the taxes are going to go down there, and there's no way they're going to stay the same. Taxes have to go up. So this was 15 years ago, right? The debt now is what, 36 trillion? So it's 3.5 times.
Oh, I thought it was 3.6 trillion.
Now I think it's 36 trillion, 36. Right? So, yeah. And what has happened to tax rates? We had a pretty sizable tax cut that was implemented in 2017. Tax rates are lower now than they were when he and I had this conversation, when he was convinced that the only way taxes could go is up. And he was absolutely wrong about that. So I caution clients about overconfidence about predicting the future, even on something that we feel we're certain of. Right, like his confidence.
Caution advisors of predicting the future.
Yeah. And I also brought out to him, and I mentioned this to clients, that it's possible that tax revenues, the government can find a way to increase tax revenues, but your tax rate might not go up. So I said I can give you 2 examples of that. We've had presidential candidates in recent memory who proposed a flat tax. Right? I'm not saying that will happen, but if you look at, there's half a dozen proposals out there and studies have been done on those as to what would it take for a percentage tax on every American to meet the national budget for each year. And the range is like between, 12 and 18% or something like that. It comes up in the mid-teens. So imagine a scenario where I, as an investor, decide I want to go all in on Roth conversions and I'm filling up the 24 or the 32% tax bracket. And then legislation passes and we all go to a flat tax and we're all paying 16%. Now I'm going to be kicking myself that I went crazy with Roth conversions. Or another example.
Well, that you went crazy front loading the Roth conversions.
Front loading, exactly.
Because you could have always, like the example in year 2, you know what? Things change, and so you're more path independent in your thinking.
Absolutely. And another alternative, probably a more realistic alternative, is the current administration is focused on raising taxes on those married couples just earning $400,000 and above, and not really changing the taxes for those earning $400,000 and less. It's not hard to imagine someone in the White House and a certain composition of Congress that would be in favor of going even harder toward the people earning more than $400,000 and then lowering taxes on those earning less than $400,000 so that they have more money in their pockets so they could stimulate the economy and spend more. That would be a scenario where most of our clients, most affluent Americans, are going to be showing less than $400,000 of taxable income in retirement. It takes a lot of assets to generate $400,000 of taxable income each year for retirees.
No, and sometimes when you're retired, there's many folks that when they start hitting their no-go years, they even if physically they may not be able to spend that money.
Yeah. So, those are a couple of scenarios where the government could raise revenues, raise taxes, but not raise taxes on you, and your personal tax rate in the future, when you could have had a larger IRA pulling money out at a lower rate, but instead you really went all in, leaning into Roth conversions too much. So for me, I think Roth conversions they're a form of hedging, if you think about it, right? You are hedging against future tax increases, or maybe not, that's probably not the way to say it, but you're hedging against the possibility that your personal tax rate might be higher in the future. So you're okay paying a higher tax up front.
Yeah. And so with some of those examples you were giving too, it sounded like I see this more generally. It's always, let's get the IRA account down to zero, but that's rarely going to be the goal of a Roth conversion strategy. And now you may have other income sources, but at least for those who may not have much else besides Social Security, you at least want ideally your RMDs would fill up the standard deduction. And if you did 100% Roth conversion, you might just be wasting the opportunity to pay taxes at 0%, which is what happens as you fill the standard deduction. So I think that,
Exactly.
don't know if that applied in those cases you gave, but certainly it relates to that idea of let's maximize our Roth conversions, get those accounts down to zero, because rarely that's going to be an optimal way to do things.
Yeah, you mentioned that. I think I might have mentioned in a prior podcast, we had a client once who did that. A prospect came to us and she just had one account. It was a $2 million Roth, very unusual. And I asked her about it. And she said she had engaged in a lot of significant Roth conversions over the years. And it just so happened she was a retired CFP, a retired certified financial planner. And we had to break the news to her that she had voluntarily paid tax in her peak earning years at a higher bracket. And she had guaranteed that she was going to be in the 0% bracket for her entire retirement. But she had given up on taking advantage of that standard deduction. Standard deduction is lost on her. She didn't have any taxable income. So if you picture a married couple with, say, 30,000 of standard deduction, if you give that up, that's 30 grand a year that you could be taking tax-free from your IRA. Over 30 years, that's $900,000. So it's, I would take your comment, Wade, even a step further. It is never our desire to completely remove all potential for taxable income from an IRA. I kind of want that, at least some of it, for that very reason. I want to use that standard deduction to offset it.
And also what we talked about before with the health expense or the long-term care expense, being able to have something to apply against those deductions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we have a lot more to talk about here. So maybe we should even make this into a two-parter and continue our discussion next week. Because I know there's a lot more questions I have. We haven't even talked about like the impacts of the Secure Act, or whether market downturns present opportunities, or even where we should be paying taxes from, or how much to Roth convert. So if it's okay for both of you, let's stop here and continue this conversation on Roth conversions next week.
Sounds like a plan.
All righty.
Okay, so we'll catch everyone next time on Retire with Style.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.